Hey everybody, this is Adam from Tyrant CNC. Today we're going to show you how to install one of our ITTS improved Tyrant trigger systems for the Hellcat and Hellcat Pro. Today for this install, we're going to show you how to do it on one of the Hellcat Pros, just so we have a bigger pistol, bigger body to work on, so it's easier for you to see exactly what we're doing. To get started, all you need is the trigger itself from us, Tyrant, and we give you an included Allen key that you're going to need later, and then you need a couple small punches and then a hammer. Let's get started. To get started installing your Tyrant CNC ITTS improved Tyrant trigger system into our Hellcat Pro, we first want to make sure the gun is unloaded before we start. We'll simply remove the magazine, get that out of the picture, lock open the slide, visually manually check it's unloaded. Now to begin this install, we want to have our slide rack to the rear, so we already accomplished that. Then you can flip up your takedown bar and let the slide go forward. We've already manually and visually checked that the gun's unloaded, so we can pull the trigger and then the slide will be removed from the gun. For this install, we will not need the slide at all, so we're going to set that aside. Then we're going to need to knock out 3 frame pins. We're going to knock out this pin, which goes through the trigger in the frame, and then these other 2 pins which hold the trigger block and the sear block. So these 3 pins need to be removed. You might be able to push these out by hand with a punch, or we have a small hammer to assist us if they're going to be a little bucky today. Let's see how our frame is today. We'll give a little push on the trigger pin first. That pushed right out, which is great. Then we want to work on this trigger block pin and this sear block pin. We'll see if we can push these out. That pushes out as well. Now we have one more to push out. That was a little stiffer on my personal gun, but still not bad. Now what we want to do is lift out this entire metal trigger block as well as the sear block. These are 2 independent systems, but they are connected by a transfer bar here. So what you can do is use the punch that we just used and kind of pry, lift this up, get that started. Can maybe wiggle it out by finger. Ours is a little stuck, not too stuck, but a little stiff. We're still lifting this out, prying, lifting, prying, lifting. You can move over to the rear, try and lift up on your sear block a little bit. Get these wiggling and moving together, hopefully. So we got our sear block willing to come out. Our trigger block is being a little tougher. So we still want to just keep trying to pry and lift this up. Going to use a different punch here. Get this to lift up a little more for us. We're going to take out our takedown bar here. Oh, now it all falls out. So what you see that we have here is this is our trigger block. We can put our takedown pin back in. That was in a vertical position when we were disassembling. This is going to be your slide lock or slide release. That goes right here. And then we also have this pin right here that sits in the trigger block, and it creates tension against this. All this stuff we're going to set aside for now. What we want to work on is this right here. We have our factory trigger, transfer bar, and sear block. The frame for the time being we don't need, so we're going to set that away as well. So now to get our Tyrant trigger onto this transfer bar, what we need to do is knock out this little roll pin out of the factory trigger. So I'm going to use this smaller punch, and then so we can drive this out but not bend and warp or ruin our transfer bar, a little trigger block or just a drive block like this can be helpful. I'm going to try and find a spot on here where I can whack away on this, but still have everything stay together for me. Right there looks pretty good. And now with our hammer, we're going to give this some punches. And just like that, get this out of the way so you guys can see. We have our pin out, tiny little pin here. And now I can take the factory trigger off. Now the nice thing about your Tyrant CNC ITTS trigger for the Springfield Hellcat and Hellcat Pro is that instead of roll pins, which you need certain size punches, you're worried about hitting them too hard, sometimes they can be stiff and tough, you don't have to worry about any of that with the Tyrant trigger. This has small Allen keyed screws, so we can use this accompanying Allen key that comes with your trigger and simply unscrew this pin. The pin that you want to unscrew is going to be this one here, the one furthest away from where the muzzle would be. So we're going to unscrew this, remove it entirely, and then we're going to slide our transfer bar into here. Once you can see that your transfer bar is lined up with that hole, we can go and get our screw, punch that back in, and screw it in. And you are on. See how that was significantly easier than getting a punch, knocking out a roll pin, getting a block. That's one of the many upgraded features and benefits of our Tyrant trigger. Now we're going to take this factory roll pin and factory trigger shoe, get this out of the picture. We no longer need this since we have our upgraded Tyrant one. And we're going to start putting this all back in our frame. So to get started, we're going to put our sear block in. That'll go into the rear of the frame here. Going to drop and shimmy that into place. And then we're dropping our trigger through a hole as well. We got that to fall through. Next, we need to put our trigger block back. So we're going to slide this into place. This has some grooved channels here on the frame, so we need to match that up with our trigger block. We're going to slide that down in there. Make sure that spring that had fallen out earlier out of this trigger block is oriented correctly and put where it needs to go. And actually it looks like in order to get our trigger block in, just like we had taken our takedown pin out earlier, we're going to need to remove that again. So we're going to remove that. Now our trigger block won't fight us. Can put that takedown pin back in where we'd like it to be. Get that in the vertical position for when we have our gun fully assembled again later. And that pin that we had on the trigger block does actuate on this, so we got to make sure that gets compressed a little bit. So now we have our takedown pin in the trigger block. The last thing we need is to put our slide lock piece back in the gun as well. And in order to do that, we need to get it next to this pin here, and we're going to have it so that that pin is sitting on top of this flat right here. It's a little bit of a tricky process, but you want to slide this all in here and get it oriented properly on the frame. We might need to get this to be installed at the same time as the block because that's feeling like a tight fit on my gun. On your personal firearm, you might be able to do it in a different stepwise fashion, but for mine, it's looking like we're going to have to do that in one movement. Get our pin back on the trigger block. Get that back where it's supposed to be. And then we're going to get our takedown bar back in place. So now, all that we have left is our trigger pin, trigger block pin, and rear sear block pin. The easiest one should be our sear block. We're going to try and push and then just gently hammer that one in. That drove in real nice. That's good. Try and flatten that out with a punch. Then next, we're going to put through this sear block pin. Actually, we're going to do the trigger first. The trigger would be easiest to start on the right-hand side of the frame. We're going to push that in, and then to further get started, we're going to take a punch and then help it make its way through and line up with everything else. So we got that pushed in. The final thing we should need then is just this pin here. We're going to push that in through the frame. And there you have it. We have our trigger installed. Now we're just going to put our slide back on, function test this, and make sure that we did everything correctly. And make sure that my recoil spring didn't kind of slide out of the way or do anything too crazy since we set aside. So now our gun was unloaded, it's still unloaded. Can pull the trigger, it resets. Trigger is functioning just fine. Insert a magazine. And that still hasn't changed our functioning at all. So there we have properly installed our Tyrant CNC ITTS Trigger for the Hellcat and Hellcat Pro. So there you have it, guys. We took our ITTS Improved Tyrant Trigger System and we were able to install that in my personal Hellcat Pro in just a few minutes. You don't need a lot of tools, just a few punches, and it's procedural. Make sure that you remove pins in the correct order, put them back in the correct order, and it's really easy to install this yourself at home. We did it here in just a few minutes. And as always, guys, if you need any parts for your Springfields, Glocks, Sig Sauers, even rifles like your AR-15s, make sure to check out TyrantCNC.com. That's TYRANTCNC.com.